Good afternoon and welcome to the second Monash Tech Talk for 2020. And the topic today is organisational resilience and technology beyond COVID. And I think the key word to focus on there is beyond, because what we're all interested in is what next. I'm Bernadette Schwerdt. I'll be your virtual MC for this event, and what an event we have for you. It's a veritable cornucopia of content for you to feast upon over your lunch hour. Now, I'm not sure about you, but I've been aware that there's a new emerging disease. I don't know if you know about it. It's called the cricked neck disease. And what's happening is because we're attending so many Zoom conferences, we're actually getting to go like this because we're so interested in what people's bookshelves have that we're actually not paying attention to what the speakers are saying. So if that's you, that would be me as well. I'm very interested in what people are reading at the moment. But this topic today is very interesting. It's very timely. We've got four amazing minds to share with you their insights and wisdom. So a bit about me. You might be wondering, why am I here? What's my role in this? Very briefly, I've written 2 books about online business, and so that really is smack bang in the middle of technology and business, and that's my key area. I also have a tech startup called Machine Dreams, and we help people spot defects in critical assets before those defects become catastrophic, and we use machine learning to do that. So that's a little bit about me, but let's get on to the guests, and they're who you're here to hear about. So our first guest is Professor John Whittle, and John is the Dean of the Faculty of Information Technology at Monash University. John is a leading expert in software engineering, and he's interested in how we can develop software systems that incorporate social values. Carolyn Chin-Parry is the Managing Director and Digital Innovation Leader at PwC in Singapore, so she's joining us from Singapore today. She was voted Woman of the Year for the Women in IT Asia Awards, and she drives the digital innovation agenda at PwC, and she provides pro bono digital upskilling for social enterprises. John Karagounis is the CEO of the CEO Circle, and he sits down regularly with the top CEOs of this country in exclusive, confidential forums, and he reveals the insights that's going on in their worlds, and he's going to share those private conversations with you today. I don't know if they're going to be so much private anymore, but John, we're looking forward to hearing what they are. And Professor Simon Wilkie is the Dean of the Faculty of Business and Economics Department at Monash University. He was the Chief Economic Policy Strategist at Microsoft in the US and Chief Economist with the US Federal Communications Commission. So they are our guests today. Now, what you might notice, they've either worked or working at Monash, or they've studied at Monash, and that's a beautiful segue to acknowledge the people who are bringing this seminar and webinar to you, and it's the people from the Information Technology faculty. So thank you for putting this together. I want to frame this conversation with a wonderful quote that I read that Andy Groves from Intel actually spoke or wrote. He said, "Bad companies are destroyed by crises. Good companies survive them. Great companies are improved by them." And I think that's what this focus for today is. We want to know how we can improve what we're doing. So what I want to do is just bring John Whittle into the conversation first up. And Professor John, you are at the forefront of business and technology and research. You know what's happening at that coalface. My question to you is, what role has digital technology played in Australia's economic recovery?
Sure, thanks, Bernadette. And that was a great quote that you started with there. And the quote that I always give, which I have no idea who said it because it's so common, is that in every crisis there's an opportunity.
Yeah.
The bigger the crisis, the bigger the opportunity. And I think that's definitely the situation that we find ourselves in today. So I think, look, I think it's pretty clear that the economy is in trouble. You know, the IMF is predicting almost a 7% shrinkage in the economy this year. The Treasury has said that we're moving towards 10% unemployment, and some estimates that even higher than that. And, you know, a lot of expert commentators are now saying this is not going to be a quick V-shaped recovery, but it's actually going to, you know, take a lot longer to recover from that. So I guess I'm coming from the digital world, digital technology, new technologies like AI and machine learning. And I think there is a key role for digital technology to play in actually helping to get the economy moving again. And I think that really is there for 2 reasons. So the first reason is that it's just going to be essential. You know, pretty much every industry has been hit by the crisis economically. And they're going to have to cut costs and find different ways of doing business as we emerge from that. And there was already quite a lot of talk and quite a lot of efforts towards digitally transforming business before the crisis. But, you know, it was quite a slow burn. There was a lot of lethargy around that, you know, a lot of, you know, uncertainty about whether digital technology could really deliver on its promises and really transform business in the way that some people thought it could. But I think what we're going to see now, you know, with the, you know, the quote, necessity is the mother of invention, that those digital technologies are going to be absolutely essential to needs to allow them to gain more efficiencies and to, you know, kind of automate areas of their business. And we're going to see the acceleration of that digital transformation.
Mm.
There's also Bernadette, there's also a second reason, I think, why this is going to accelerate. And that's because we've actually just lived through a massive, very rapid digital transformation that probably, if we were asked 2 months ago, we thought wasn't even possible. We've all, you know, many of us are working from home, on Zoom or other web platforms, you know, running events like this online. And for the most part, it's worked pretty smoothly. You know, there were some early concerns about privacy and things like that, but it's mostly worked smoothly. And I think that will illustrate to the CEOs in industry that digital transformation on a large scale, very rapidly, is actually possible. So I think we're going to see a massive acceleration of that.
Mm. And John, in terms of some of the AI and machine learning that you've just referred to and automation, what kinds of applications are we seeing that's helping us, you know, apply those transformational technologies?
Sure. So AI, or artificial intelligence, AI, first of all, is a very nebulous term. It can mean different things to different people, but you know, for the purposes of today, you can think of it just in terms of automating tasks that otherwise would be done by humans. Even before the crisis, we were seeing AI being used across pretty much every industry. There was a report by McKinsey, I think, a couple of years ago, that said that you know, over half of companies were actually already using AI in some way. But that report also said that they were typically using AI in very limited ways and to automate, you know, very low-level tasks or very small things. So, you know, and that would differ by industry. So in retail, they might have been using it in marketing and sales to keep better track of their customer databases. In manufacturing, they might have been using robotics. You know, in other areas, they were using different aspects of AI, like chatbots and things like that. But that McKinsey report also said that although more than half of companies were using AI, very few companies really had the processes in place to properly leverage the full capabilities of AI. And I think now that this crisis has come along, we're potentially going to see that accelerate very fast and see that change from, you know, kind of experimental use in a small part of the business to use at an enterprise level.
And John, what sort of risks are you seeing associated with the adoption of these kinds of technologies?
Sure. So I think, you know, one of the things about technology is that it happens very fast. And often we find that the kind of social and legal frameworks that we have can't necessarily keep up with that. You know, we've seen that for many years, actually, even with the kind of rise of social media and kind of issues around kind of online bullying and things like that. So I think that's the risk here, that we see the opportunity for this rapid digital transformation. But the technology comes in very fast, and we also have to be very careful that we take into account what I call human values when we introduce technology. And what I mean by that is that if you look at AI, it's starting now to make decisions for us on a day-to-day basis, which means it's actually shaping the kind of society that we're going to be living in the future. And if we don't put our own values into that technology, we could end up with a society which is not what we want, doesn't reflect our values as human beings. So there's some very obvious examples of this. Usually people talk about privacy and security. These are good examples of values, but they're actually values that the that the industry has got a reasonably good handle on. But there's also other values like transparency or fairness or just social responsibility that the software engineering methods that we have today don't really give us a very good handle on how to deal with those values and make sure that those values are embedded in the technologies.
And John, just in your role at the university, obviously been hit very hard, all universities across the board. What sort of strategies or initiatives are you seeing being implemented to deal with this this crisis, and how are they showing some resilience?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think, you know, universities, like any business, is having to change the nature of its business. What I would say is that I think universities are going to be more important than ever as we emerge from the crisis. We've got, you know, hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions of people, who have suddenly found themselves unemployed. We've got companies who will be cutting costs. We've got whole industries that will be transforming the way that they actually do business. And all of that leads to a massive need for upskilling and reskilling across the country. And that's really where universities can come in. So, you know, I think, you know, providing training in easy to digest ways, you know, and in very modern ways to the country, and things like digital technologies is going to be really important. We've started doing this ourselves at Monash anyway. We've introduced a new course, for example, in what we call applied data science, which is not a course about the technology. It's a course about how is the technology actually applied in a particular domain. So whether that's in law, health, agriculture, or whatever it happens to be.
I think you're right there, John. It's the application, isn't it? Because we've all been thrust into this new environment where we actually have to use it, whether we like it or not. Zoom and all these new platforms that, you know, business owners may never have touched. So it's actually a nice segue. Thank you, John, into Caroline. Carolyn, in terms of your working in Singapore, and often Singapore is at the forefront of technology, both from a government and private perspective. Can you tell us about some of the technologies you're seeing being unfurled in your neck of the woods?
Yes, more than happy to do so. Happy to share about the Singapore story, but also the broader Asia story. So one area is around the use of drones. So our national parks have used drones to help monitor the usage of our parks. Unlike Australia, our parks are a lot smaller and we are very densely populated. So by using these drones, our national parks can actually track how many people are using the parks and if there's any clusters or groups of people that should not be grouped together. We also have noticed that in China, for example, the authorities have used drones to monitor people with social distancing and also during the lockdown period. We've also now introduced in Singapore drones to help with delivering supplies from land to sea, so the people who work on ships don't have to dock if they don't need to, and also being able to deliver critical supplies such as medical, you know, during natural disasters and during search and rescue as well. So that's in addition to the COVID situation. Additionally, we've seen other types of technologies, such as robots disinfecting hospitals and cleaning airports, autonomous vehicles, moving around the parks, reminding people about social distancing. Also automated stores such as supermarkets where they use facial recognition for payments, or smart trolleys, and even the use of signboards in subway stations. So such as, you know, if there's an advertisement that you like, all you have to do is scan your phone and the product ends up at your front door. So in addition to that, it's about accessibility in buildings. So being able to use facial recognition instead of key cards, as well as wearables such as Fitbit to help reduce healthcare insurance premiums. And I think that many people have also heard about the all-in-one social media super apps, such as the WeChats of the world, that have taken over as well, which is very much a one-stop shop where you could do a lot of things in the one app itself. So that's some of the technologies that have come up.
Fascinating. And that actually brings up the question I gave to John, which was about the risk and incorporating those human values into the software, because you are well advanced. I'm curious, firstly, how is the public taking and adopting those technologies? Are they welcoming? Are they pushing back? What's the vibe?
I suppose in Asia, our culture is quite different. I've lived in Australia for 18 years, so I do understand the culture quite well. And being in Asia, I suppose that people are very receptive to suggestions by the government, partly because, currently we're in a situation that's very unprecedented, and we very much value our health and well-being, sometimes even more so than our own personal privacy. But having said that, we do give up a lot of personal privacy, especially using day-to-day normal social media apps anyway. So what's the difference between that and, contact tracing app, for example? That's another conversation altogether. But definitely our culture embraces technology, and it also is one which embraces health first more than anything else.
And John also touched on the values and incorporating the values into the software, and how the way we do this now, is going to predicate how it moves forward, and the voices and the mindset that is from the programmers and the engineers being incorporated. What's Singapore doing to ensure that those values are inclusive and diverse and all the things that we need it to be?
What's really good is that we have a government who is very pro-digital and pro-technology. So we do have a number of government agencies that really focus on our Smart Nation agenda. And this includes being able to digitize as much as we can across not just the government, but also all industry sectors. So they do have very special committees that help to advise our ministers, for example, in terms of what is best practice. And I do personally know a number of the experts advising the ministers, and they all come from different walks of life. Some of them own AI companies, others are management consultants in the Big Four. In fact, I sit next to one of them who do advise the government, and they do really take into consideration privacy, the ethics behind things, the fairness and transparency, all the different factors that John had mentioned earlier. So they do think about it not just from a government perspective, but also from a personal perspective, as well as industry perspective. So these things are also considered very broadly.
It's great. So let's just bring it now into the narrow. We've talked broadly. Let's talk about the specifics. If a person was listening and they've got a business and they want to future-proof their business based on what we've just experienced, what ideas or tips could you give them?
I think I like to call it future ready rather than future proof, because technology always moves so fast. Sometimes it's very hard to predict everything. I would say that, one of the most important things as an individual as well as a business owner is actually about lifelong learning and having that hunger and thirst to learn. And I think that that's the first starting point. By having this, it actually helps you to have that need and want to actively research the latest trends in technology, being able to explore what some of the new digital business models are for your industry and also outside your industry. Really think about, well, based on these trends, what does that actually mean for my business? What does it mean for my industry? And which are the right skills that I need to have based on what I've just found out? So being able to identify the right digital upskilling initiatives to undertake, and also really looking at, some of the trends. So for example, if you belong to a very large organization, we are seeing in Singapore quite a number of large organizations setting up digital academies in addition to the normal learning and development department. We also see a number of initiatives in terms of, say, running digital accelerator programs, and also closer collaboration between governments, employers, and education providers. So in Singapore, we have this thing called TESA, which is short for Technology Skills Accelerator. And this is where we try to attract mid-career professionals who are vulnerable in the digital world, and get the government to actually have offered to pay employers to employ these people for 2 years, and at the same time also pay for these education providers to train them in the right skills that these employers are interested in. So the agreement is that these employers take on these newly trained employees for 2 years, which is sponsored by the government. And it's kind of like a win-win situation, because you avoid unemployment. You make sure that education providers such as university or professional training providers get a new cohort of people who are professionals, and also the employer gets the right kind of skills that they're looking for. So I think this is definitely something that's worth considering, because I've always advocated stronger ties between the government employers and training providers, because we are moving into a very different world where technology is moving really fast, and quite often people can't change their sources of technology. So being able to make sure that we have an open mindset to upskill ourselves and improve ourselves so that we can remain relevant.
That's brilliant.
And can I just jump in?
Absolutely.
So I completely agree with what Carolyn has just said about the importance of learning and lifelong learning and staying on top of developments in digital technology. I would add to that, because you used the word mindset earlier, Bernadette, and I think if I was to give one piece of advice to business owners right now, my advice would be that you have to change your mindset. So if you've got the mindset that, you know, we're in this crisis, we're going to come out of this crisis and we're going to go back to what we had before, so-called normal, then I think that's the wrong mindset. You have to be in the mindset that the world is a different place. That yes, there's going to be new challenges, but there's also going to be new opportunities for you, and you have to get out there and get ahead of the game and grasp those opportunities as quickly as you can.
I think that's right, John. And the sense of, in the past, people may have waited for training to come to them, or, you know, they ticked the box of the training that they wanted to do. Now you've got, what I'm hearing, Carolyn, you've got to go out and get it. You've got to say, I need to learn this, this, and this to remain relevant.
Yeah.
And in fact, that really segues nicely into my next guest, which is John. So thank you, Carolyn. We'll come back to you, by the way, by all means, if you have a question. John, what you're doing is really interesting. You meet with executives at a very high level on a regular basis, and they tell you what's going on. So my question there is, you know, what's on their minds right now? What are the questions they're asking? What are they worried about, these CEOs? And by the way, who are these CEOs that you're actually working with?
So it's interesting, Bernadette. We've got 200 leaders of industry that are involved in circles around the country. That includes, you know, some outstanding future leaders and some incredible and insightful, some of you know, the industry's top executive assistants. And let me tell you, they've got some incredible insights too. So they've got a lot on their minds right now, especially the leaders of industry, because they're dealing with, you know, a forever changing landscape. It changes from one day to the next. So we went from a health issue it's only been, and not forgetting, this has only been 6, 7, 8 weeks. And for some, it's been probably, you know, even less than that, because they've been slow to react. So it's been very, very quick, and it's accelerated extremely quickly. But it moved from a health issue to how on earth do we make money in this environment when things just stop overnight, your revenue streams stop overnight, to preserving cash, to managing cash. Cash is king, to survival. And now what I'm delighted about is that we've gone to the next phase where they're talking about, okay, let's talk about beyond the curve. We're not focused on the curve now. We're talking about what does the new day one look like? And to John's comment, day one is not going to be normal. It's the new normal, as we call it. And day one, what we talk about, or how we call it day one within the circles, is that it's going to be when things go back to some form of normality. And right now, it's talking about what are the opportunities that are in front of us. And we've seen people move into digital and embrace digital like they never have. I remember Professor John Whittle did a presentation to Circle members in Melbourne a year or so ago and said that, you know, we're not moving as quickly as all the other, you know, countries around the world when it comes to technology, digital, AI, and all things tech-based. Whereas this is the impetus that we need to actually embrace technology and look at how we can build the resilience within our teams and accelerate projects, accelerate how we go about doing things in a much more efficient and much more effective way. And we've been forced to, because cash flow is going very quickly. We need to survive beyond the next 6 to 12 months because we don't know what's going to happen. The uncertainty is clear, and how do you deal with uncertainty in this current environment? So we've seen some incredible big corporates, and we've got a variety, to your question, we've got a variety of industries involved in the circle: large, small, agile startups, entrepreneurial companies, and larger corporates. They've embraced technology, and a great example are the banks, and the Commonwealth Bank, for instance, and some of the other bigger banks like the ANZ have embraced and have turned things that usually would take them 12 to 18 months to put in place. They've turned it around within a 48-hour to 72-hour time frame. I mean, that's unheard of. The need, and they've been able to do that. And then, you know, all these industries and all their corporates are looking at that and thinking, well, why on earth did it take us so long to implement things in the past?
Yeah.
You know, Why is it that we have to tick the boxes and go through due process and have 15, 20 people, divisions, departments go through something before we actually implement something? So that's a wonderful thing. Yeah.
And another good example of exactly that is actually the university sector. You know, we were actually involved in this crisis earlier than most because we were affected by the China travel bans, even back in January. But when we made the decision to move all of our teaching online, we did that in a matter of days. And, you know, there'd been years before that of kind of discussions of going online and so forth. But again, you need a crisis to take the opportunity. And, you know, when that came, we just went online in days. And sure, you know, there's still work to be done to improve and make it better. But the fact that you can do it in such a short space of time is very similar to that CBA example.
It's about moving quickly. Yeah.
Telehealth is the other one, Bernadette, John, where we've seen, you know, some health providers, their telehealth online engagements with their patients has increased 30-40%. Now, when we go back to day one to some form of normality, that'll come back, but it won't go back to the 3 and 4 and 5% that it went back to. It'll go to somewhere in between, which means, again, there's efficiencies, there's opportunities there in terms of streamlining processes and making organisations much more efficient and focusing on the important things. So
John, I have a question in terms of some of the people I've interviewed for my books who are, you know, Australia's top online entrepreneurs, and this is no word of lie, but some of them have made billion-dollar exits and they still can't use Google Docs. And I'm just interested in what you think, because you're meeting with CEOs all the time. Now, they might be of a certain vintage and a certain, you know, demographic, and therefore they haven't necessarily needed to adopt technology to get through the ranks. But now they've got people underneath them, for example, the millennials, the digital natives, who potentially know more than they do, and they're feeling really disenfranchised because they're no longer in control. So if someone's listening and they're in that role, and they are, and in fact, Carolyn talked about it nicely, they're mid-career and they're being retrained. But is that something you're seeing, and what are you suggesting that they do? Because if they can't make these strategic decisions based on technology because they don't have the knowledge, what's the future of that organisation?
Is that John Whittle or John?
That was John K. Yeah.
So we've seen people have embraced, so our CEOs have embraced technology and Zoom conferencing, video conferencing, whether it be Google Hangouts or Google Meets or whatever else, they've embraced it because they've been forced to. And surprisingly, and I'm one of those, my team had this technology in the boardroom for the last year and a half, and I've resisted using it. But when the circles couldn't meet physically around a boardroom table, we saw the signs very early in the piece, so we moved very swiftly and went to Zoom. And our attendance rates have skyrocketed as a result of that, because people want to get around a boardroom table, or should I say a virtual screen, and talk about what's top of mind, share and impart in confidential surrounds, and learn from one another. So the engagement piece has skyrocketed. So the CEOs, generally speaking, have embraced remote access, remote working from home. Zoom is a great example, and to John's point, John Whittle's point, we were talking about this the other day, Zoom is a pretty basic technology, you know, and you can't hug from a virtual conference perspective. Well, not yet, Mr. Whittle, is that right, Professor
That's
Whittle?
Right, yeah. There's been work on it, but you can't do it yet.
Absolutely, but I'll tell you what, you know, digital and technology is accelerating now, and all the CEOs that we're dealing with right now have put their foot on the pedal, and they're accelerating all the digital strategies to the nth, because they need to say, to John's point, they need to become more and more efficient. They need, because post JobKeeper, the reality is there's going to be a lot of redundancies.
Yeah.
That's the unfortunate, that's the harsh reality. There's going to be a lot of redundancies. They have to look at their costs, every single dollar, to make sure that it counts where it really has impact to the bottom line. To sustain.
And I would just add to John's point. So it's great that the CEOs have embraced technology, but it's actually not about Google Docs and Zoom, because as John said, these are, you know, this is kind of entry level stuff. And coming back to the AI conversation, you know, I think one of the challenges we've had with AI in the past is it does tend to be somewhat of an overhyped technology. And it's very difficult for a CEO at a non-technology business to really understand the ins and outs of AI, what it actually is, what it actually can do, what it can't do, what are the limitations. And I think there's probably a job to be done across the country, both from universities and also from government, in just better educating, what can be done with AI and kind of putting that hype.
I tend to agree with both Johns in the sense that, there are some CEOs that are a little bit slower with technology, and that's fine. I think the main thing is about where you obtain your advice from. And I think this is where they can leverage from setting up digital advisory committees to be able to, help advise the CEO on many angles. I think relying on just one person like a CIO or CTO, while it's useful, might sometimes be a little bit dangerous, because I think that most technologists are not deep dive specialists in all areas. And sometimes as people, we may have preferences for technology over others, which may or may not be holding true for your particular type of industry. I think additionally, there'll be a need for senior leaders, maybe CEOs, C-suites, or board directors to actually, while they may not need to be a digital expert, I think they need to surround themselves with the right people, and also really embrace technology from the viewpoint of curiosity, attending webinars like this, conferences, and seeing what's out there as well in terms of that technology. And I think it's important to see what's out there in the world, not just within your country, but also out there beyond just your industry, because you might actually learn some insights that can be useful. And I think that, it's just one of those things where everyone has their own slight resistance when it comes to technology, but at the same time, you can't avoid it altogether. So what are some of the new opportunities that you can consider? And I think one thing about digital or anything to do with IT is that it needs to flip. When I say flip, I really mean that it used to be considered a cost center, when in reality it can be used as a value creator, generating new revenue channels that were never possible before.
And one man who knows a lot about that is Simon Wilkie. Simon, you've worked for Microsoft. You've been very close to technology and all the amazing developments, both working in America and now working in Australia. Simon, what are you? I'd like just to get your thoughts on what maybe has already been discussed. In terms of the technology, the CEOs. It's kind of an open forum question to you. What have you heard so far that you'd like to comment on?
So first thing is, I noticed that I turned the mute button off correctly at the right point in time. So that's a start. I'm in violent agreement, unfortunately, with that. I like to be controversial, but I actually agree with the tone of the conversation and where everybody's going, which is that the most important thing here is firms are undergoing the digital transformation. This incident that we've gone through now with COVID is dramatically accelerating that transformation. And even though the focus is on digital and the technology, the real transformation that has to happen is in the mindset. The technology is a tool. We need to rethink business processes, then we need to rethink the way we do business, the way we organize society, the way government operates. With a fresh sheet of paper, looking at these technologies as a tool and new ways of doing things, not as a substitute, just to speed up the current processes that we already have. And that mindset change is the hardest thing to implement. So I joined Microsoft after most of my career was in academia, other than a brief stint in government. Microsoft in 2014 realized that it had fallen behind. It had granted Amazon a huge head start in cloud computing, and they sort of had the aha moment, realizing that cloud computing was the future, and they'd given Amazon a several years head start. So they had to change the way they rethought the organization and the way they did business inside. And the answer to that was not to hire more technologists, but was to hire a different skill set of people. So they started bulking up with people like myself, economists, and just challenging the way that decisions are made inside the company, and to make the company more data-driven, rather than the culture of the leader is the highest paid person in the room and you defer to them in terms of expertise and decision making. You really need to change the culture to the data is telling you what the decision needs to be. That's huge. That's very difficult. Amazon had the great virtue of being built like that from the ground up, as Jeff Bezos was making it up. And so they were the first ones to sort of employ an army of data scientists to drive decision making rather than management expertise. So Microsoft made that sort of painful transition over those years. So by 2017, for example, the quarterly forecast that's released to Wall Street, rather than being driven by the army of experts inside the company, at that stage we had enough confidence in the algorithm that was run on the data to replace the expertise with the algorithm. Now the CFO just looks at it and decides if it makes sense, in which case the prediction of the algorithm is released to the street. But that's just not replacing human effort. It actually creates a new product, which is now, instead of a quarterly forecast, we can have the 1:06 p.m. on a Wednesday forecast, right? We have nowcasting because the data is being ingested all the time. And that changes the way you look at business. It makes you much more elastic, is a word people like to use. We can change on the fly. We can change strategy. We can pivot. Because not only do we have the data coming in, not only do we have the processing power coming in, but the real difference, what the people call the fourth industrial revolution, to put bones on it, is put meat on the bone, sorry, is it's the rise of what I like to call universal ambient intelligence. It's not data, it's not computing power, it's substituting, as both the Johns alluded to before, human decision-making with automated intelligence. And so it's, if you will, democratizing intelligence. If you think of the second industrial revolution that we went through between 1890 and 1920, that was about mass production and the democratization of stuff. Now we're seeing the democratization of intelligence. That's going to completely reshape the way organizations operate. We need to ask the question, why does this organization even exist? We need to start with, what's its purpose? Maybe we should just fold up the tent and go home. We'll see many more spontaneous organizations formed to solve a problem. We can use a social graph to get the right set of talents together, rather than the traditional hierarchical structures that we've seen. And so I think what's happened with this transformation that we've gone through now is it's accelerating this process to a degree that I didn't see coming. Part of what I was doing for the last few years was going out talking to companies about the transformation we made inside Microsoft and some of the examples of how we changed the mindset and how we changed the way that we operated, and also governments in particular around how do we do that. This has just put it on steroids, right? This last 8 weeks has really slapped people in the face. As John mentioned, universities have been talking about the transition to online for over a decade. In the business school, we put 400 courses online in a matter of weeks. Yeah. People said it was impossible.
Yeah.
I mean, the effort that we did is really just tremendous, and I've just got enormous respect for my team for what they did. But we had to reinvent the way, like, tutorials have always been face-to-face. We had to rethink what a tutorial was. You know, we have to start from the ground floor. We have to rethink, what's the role of exams? We had to go through every part of the process of delivering education and rethink what it meant. And are there better ways to deliver it? And as every one of the previous speakers has said, we're not going to go back to the way that it was before, because now companies have been forced, organizations, institutions have been forced to look at a different way of doing business. And the consequences of that are profound. If we look, I'm going to be a bit of a data geek for a second. If we look at, Australia's been pretty lucky because it's dodged the last few recessions. If we look at the US data, if you look at the history of the world, a recession comes along, people lose their job, recession's over, we have a recovery. John mentioned the V-shaped recovery. It used to be recoveries were quite quick. Why were they quick? Because people went back to the same job that they had before the recession, right? If you worked in the auto industry, you went back to work in the auto industry. Around 1990, that started to change. 1990 recession was very mild in the US, but 1.3% of jobs were destroyed and they never came back. Those whole jobs went away. That's why the recovery was so slow. People couldn't go back to doing the same things that they did before. Then we had the 2001 dot-com implosion. 2.5% of jobs were destroyed. They never came back. Those jobs are gone. That skill set no longer exists. Then we had the global financial crisis. 4.5% of jobs were destroyed, and they haven't come back. So Australia's going to cop all of this in this one big whammy that we're going through.
Yeah.
So to mention, companies are just going to be asking themselves, do I really need everybody to be in the same place at the same time? We seem to have got through this okay, or not. We're going to ask ourselves, what is the essential role of the human? What is the essential role of human contact? And if we ask that and then think, what did we learn from this? What can I do to change my business processes to make me more efficient, more effective, better at what I do? We're going to see different organizations coming out the other side.
It's a terrific summation of what's been happening there, Simon. I have a question, and then maybe the other panelists can contribute too. But if data is indeed democratized, and therefore decision making is democratized in the same respect, what role does the leader play here? And that's a question for anybody. I'll start with you, Simon.
So that's the question we're getting asked all the time: is what's the role of leadership in the digital age? What's the role? I think paradoxically, it's, even though the world's becoming more digital, it's to be more human, right? I think the human skills become more important. I think it's much more around empathy. It's much more around team building. It's much more around insight that is very particular to the human condition. I think those sort of skills are going to be increasingly more valuable. And so, at one level, the joke is when people ask, what skills should I learn? In the short answer, it's Python and R.
Awesome.
Python and R will get you so far, but I think it's actually the soft skills are going
It's the old-fashioned stuff, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I tend to agree with Simon, actually. Well, we can always rely on data to help with decision making. If I can share a very quick story, that Lego wouldn't be here if they followed their big data. Yes.
How's that? Tell us more.
Yes. So at one stage, Lego was about to go bankrupt, and this is all written in a nice book. And they decided wanted to get the marketers to go into a young boy's home. And then they interviewed the young boy and said, they just watched him, what he actually did. So it's not a formal interview, but he watched the boy in his household and asked him what he's most proud of. And he actually showed a very, very own worn out pair of sneakers. And they were really quite curious about that. And the young boy said, well, I'm really proud of this because of the amount of hard work I used with these sneakers to perfect my skateboarding. And based on this particular story, it then showed that, first of all, children, while they might like technology, there are other types of toys that they could invest in that provides that creativity that technologies just can't, such as Lego blocks, for example. And based on this particular child's story, it made them really rethink all the big data that they had collected so far, because sometimes you just need to see into the exact personas of your true end users in their environment, not what you perceive the environment to be, to then get the insights that sometimes you don't get through machines, right? So I do agree that big data can help with a lot of things, but in reality, in today's world, people are not looking for just big data to spit out answers. What they're really looking for is an authentic leader who can build trust, that can manage ambiguity and surprises, and also build relationships through what Simon said, empathy. Because in reality, right now, if you think about how things are being done, no one's craving for a leader that has necessarily just the facts. They're looking for someone who can actually give them the confidence to move on, to feel that they're being understood, and for that heart conversation to happen. When I say heart, I mean H-E-A-R-T, because it's actually very trying times on a personal level, on an emotional level. And, you know, people are not looking for a leader to go through his financial spreadsheets, because anyone can do that. They're looking for a leader who is actually kind, that can see the big picture, that's ready for the next step, you know, and does that with a big heart. So I would say that those are the softer qualities that people are looking for in leaders these days.
It reminds me, we've had a few quotes going around today. It reminds me of one of my favorite quotes, which was from the director of the London School of Economics, I think in 2018. And she said that in the past, jobs were about muscles. Currently, they're about brains. In the future, they'll be about hearts.
Beautiful.
And while we're at it, if I may, the reality is that organisations, and in particular leaders, will be judged based on how they make people feel during a crisis as opposed to after the crisis. So empathy, kindness, clarity, showing a bit of vulnerability. But something that we discussed the other day, all of us together, was most importantly right now is what we call, and a couple of words that we've come up with, is excessive decisiveness. And what I mean by that is you need courageous leaders right now. Leaders who can actually move quickly, swiftly, adapt to the current situation and show resilience and show their teams resilience, because there are, you know, as Simon said, it is an extremely, extremely challenging time right now. However, there are a plethora of opportunities out there. So they have to be clear and concise. They have to have clarity in this extremely uncertain environment that they're in, but show empathy, and it's the way that they actually conduct themselves and execute on their strategies, which they'll be remembered by, especially during these trying times.
Well said, John. And maybe the audience, I'm just curious as to everyone who's listening, you've obviously got experiences in this too. Maybe it'd be lovely just to hear from you. Type into the chat box, you know, what's a couple of words or a sentence about what you think managers and executives need to do in order to lead with more heart. You know, what are some of the things that you're seeing or you're doing that you think are valuable? I've got a question from an audience member for John, and this is John Whittle. If effective use of AI accelerates out of the COVID-19 crisis to help drive the efficiencies businesses will be looking for to reduce costs, how will society handle the lag factor between AI implementation and retraining displaced employees? Won't we see a bulge in long-term unemployment in the interim?
Yeah, that's a good question. Look, it actually relates a little bit to a comment that Simon made earlier that I actually wanted to take a little bit of issue with. So Simon said he was struggling to be controversial today, so let me give it a shot. Simon talked about data as being a democratization factor. But actually, I'm not so sure about that, because there's a huge, you know, it's not easy to take data and use that in a decision-making process, you know. Most data is extremely noisy. It needs to be treated with care, handled and cleaned up before you get anything useful out of it. There's a massive amount of effort that is involved in that. There is a massive amount of skill set that's actually involved in that as well. So I would argue that whilst it's got the potential to be a democratization factor, we could actually end up with a data divide between those who do have the skills and the capabilities to make data-driven decisions and those who can't, which I think relates to the point of the questioner as well, which anytime you've got a technology that you're introducing, whether it's AI or big data or you know, Zoom and working from home, there's always winners and losers, you know. And so I would think of it, though, not so much as a kind of winners and losers, but as a kind of reconfiguration of the landscape. And you just have to make sure that you're on the right side of that configuration.
Some of the answers coming through are listening with the intent to understand, getting close to the worker, working with them, beside them, asking them about their needs. So I think these are some of the ideas that, you know, we've always done, but maybe it's just more of a focus about getting close to the people who are actually doing the work and close to the customer. Who else would like to contribute to the conversation so far? Is there anything burning that you'd like to ask?
And just on the listening to understand, I think it's extremely important that we do listen to understand as opposed to listen to respond. It's extremely important. And can I go back to something that Carolyn said that I think is of critical importance for the success of any organisation and any CEO out there? And she said the team around surrounding that particular individual. It has never been more critical and more important to surround yourselves with people that are better than you and who are potentially better than you, but who think very differently to you, who can challenge you along the journey. That is of critical importance that Carolyn touched on, especially in these times of this constant change that we're all facing right now. You can't do it alone. You need a great team behind you who can actually challenge you, push you to the boundary. But at the end of the day, the leader, the buck stops with the leader. So they have to be courageous. And like I said, decisive in terms of their approach, but take the team along with them, with the journey. I'm not talking about dictatorial leadership here, but I'm not talking about the kumbaya style of leadership, as I call it, where you sit around a fire and have a consensus view. You can't afford to do that because procrastination is a waste of time, but it can lead to your demise very, very quickly in this current environment.
You've got to act quickly. A couple of ideas coming through. Leaders must be learners, which touched on Carolyn's point as well. Also about prioritising resources, a trend of executives and leaders prioritising resources into tangible products such as software. How do we sway the mindset of the decision makers to invest in human growth, such as coaching, mentoring, facilitation of human growth activities? It's chronically underestimated in terms of importance. Who would like to take that question?
I wasn't going to take that question, but I saw another thing come through on the chat, which was talking about looking at the leaders around the world today, and I think that's a really good point. So one of the things that I think makes a good leader is a good role model, and indeed bad role models. You can learn by their mistakes. And we, the political leaders around the world have never been so held so much accountable as they are now. And so what a great opportunity for up and coming leaders to look at those leaders around the world and pick your role model. I won't name names, but there are some clear examples of those that we should be looking at and those that we
shouldn't be looking at, John.
Well, we should also be looking at them, but to make sure we don't do what they do.
Learn from them, absolutely. Yeah.
There's been a question come through, it's similar, but you said it's important to have an open and learning mindset. How important is it going to be for businesses to use agile methods and processes to manifest the mindset and be future ready? That might be for you, Carolyn. Do you think?
Okay, so the hardest part really is mindset, and I think we talked a little bit about that just now. The truth is actually more than just thinking about your mindset. The real question is, do you want to be relevant moving forward? That's a very simple question. Now, if you're extremely digitally allergic, which some people are, then there are still some jobs that you can focus on, such as industries around humanistic services. So from social workers to elderly care workers to primary school teachers, daycare teachers, psychologists, even bartenders and hairdressers, whereby even if there's technology that can replace these services, people still prefer the human factor. However, in instances where, like many industries have been heavily impacted by digital, then really thinking about, well, do I really want a job in the future or right now? Right? It's a very simple question. And if you do, then please start learning to have an open mindset. But what is that? So if I can share just quickly my story. Several years ago, I had a coffee that changed my life forever. And I actually don't drink coffee. I had a coffee meeting with a former colleague. And he's a gentleman in his late 50s. Who knew a lot about technology, and I really admired him. And I said, hey, how do you keep up with all this technology? Because it's changing so fast. I'm not sure how I can keep up with it. And he basically said to me, well, Carolyn, all I do is spend 1 hour a day reading. And I just thought, wow, it's that simple, is it? And, I have 2 young children, a full-time job. I sit on 4 to 5 different advisory boards. So I have a very heavy workload, and I still carve out time every day to read and to learn. And I do this for 10 minutes in the morning. Sometimes if my meeting's running early, I spend 5 minutes reading. In pre-COVID days, it would have been, maybe sitting on a train for 20 minutes and doing that time to read. Now you might say, well, then how do I figure out how to read? So for me, I made it easy by using LinkedIn, which is free. And I basically followed every thought leader I wanted to follow. I followed the large tech giants. I followed some key fintechs and startups, as well as thought leaders in areas that I really was passionate about. And basically, you have just customized a free magazine for yourself that you can refer to at your complete convenience and at free cost. So if you can do that for even half an hour a day, you might actually really change the way that you learn. So it went to a point where I didn't have that cadence in my life to now being quite addicted to reading all the time.
That's a great,
so,
great strategy.
That's how I keep up with it, and it doesn't cost anything.
Carolyn,
I love the idea that you had a coffee meeting that changed your life. Hopefully around the world now, there are hundreds of virtual coffee meetings that people are having that are changing their lives.
Carolyn, there's a question that's come up that's relevant to this topic, which is the TSLA. Could you please tell me the training provider for mid-career upskilling? And does the Australian government have an option like that? Any that you know of?
Okay, so it's a TESA. And it exists in Singapore. I'll be very honest and say that I am not as familiar with the latest that the Australian government might propose. So I probably would look to my Australian panelists to answer that question. But having said that, I do believe that there needs to be a lot of collaboration between governments, education providers, and employers. That's what I mentioned earlier. But whether that exists in Australia right now or if it doesn't, I think that we all have to take charge and be very responsible for our careers. Now, you might scream at me and say, hey, look, but I've just been laid off and I can't find a job. I'm completely sympathetic. We've all been there. I've seen at least 3 different recessions in my life. When I graduated from, my first degree at Monash, I was Asian financial crisis. When I graduated from my master's in e-commerce, was the dot-com crash. So I really resonate with that. I'm trying to delay my PhD so that it doesn't cause another global recession. Having said that,
now, Carolyn.
So having said that, I think that, it's really about you being able to upskill yourself. Now, there are lots of courses that are free and some are also paid, whether it's Udemy, whether it's Udacity, whether it's Coursera. There's just lots of free courses online, and some are paid as well. And it's really thinking about what industry do I really want to work in? What is that next job going to be realistically for me, given the circumstances right now? What do I think is going to be in demand between now and the next 12 to 18 months? And maybe you may not have the answers, but that's where Google and LinkedIn will have a lot of friends that can help direct you in that space. And also surrounding yourself with experts, such as, sessions like this where you can ask questions on chat and get free advice for free. And also being able to have that hunger to seek and learn and differentiate yourself. I think one of the key things that we haven't discussed today is actually networking, which is very undervalued and extremely important. The truth is there are jobs out there that may not be advertised. Your friends, your former colleagues, your former bosses, any one of those people could possibly be the next person to hire you or recommend you to somebody else. So, regardless of your job status, I really think that people need to go out their way to really network, expand their professional networks, and also keep tabs with people. You don't have to message people every day, but even if it's once or twice a year, you drop someone to say, hey, I just want to say happy Christmas to you and your family. Something small like that goes a really long way to get people to remember you, even if they met you only once or only met you virtually online. But those networks need to be kept on.
And Carolyn, networking is a dirty word, as we all know it, unfortunately, because people have expectations, but I like calling it connecting and establishing lifelong relationships that in essence last way beyond your career. So, and there's a great way to actually connect with people, and that's just pick up the phone and just ask them how they are, ask them if they're okay. Don't make it about you, make it about them. Deflect from you, because it's not about you. And don't reach out to them when you need something, like you're in transition or you're in between roles or whatever else. Keep connected with them. It is of integral importance, because the majority of roles and the majority of opportunities come from your networks, your contacts, your relationships, as opposed to other means like Seek or recruiters and what have you. So it's an extremely, extremely important thing to do. To your comment, I agree with you completely, especially given this current environment that we're in, which is going to change and it's going to morph to in a very different place going forward.
Yeah.
Well, you're wrapping up, but Simon, did you have something to say?
I was just going to amplify that and say there was a study done a while ago that most people find the introduction to the job that they get from 2 degrees of separation from them.
Yeah.
Somebody 2 degrees away in their social graph.
Yeah.
But I was just going to return to the comment John made earlier. Perhaps I misspoke. I didn't mean the democratization of data per se. all the issues that he raised are correct. And in fact, that's why we're seeing the concentration of data in the hands of a few giant industrial new industries, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Facebook, precisely because it is so hard. But what we're seeing coming out of that is the rise of agents, not just Siri, Cortana, Amazon's Alexa, but these are what I mean by the democratization, that you can draw on. They become apps that people can draw on, and we're going to see that in business. And so one of the predictions that Gartner made a while ago was that we would see the rise of the virtual doppelgangers to improve productivity. That is, there would be a virtual Simon, there would be an agent created, so I could separate what is essential for the human contact and what is more routine. Anything that's a routine task, my virtual double could do. So let's call my virtual double Jimmy. So we create this agent Jimmy. I can create many Jimmys. And so based on vast amounts of data, that's not just my own personal data, but the data that resides in these mega corporations from everybody like me. And so what I think we're going to see is the rise of the agent, the rise of the Jimmy, replacing, and not replacing, but complementing our human sets. And that's what I think is the future's going to look like. So confront yourself and ask, where do I add value as a human? And let's focus on building that.
That's a terrific way to wrap it up, Simon. I just want to acknowledge a couple of the comments that are coming through. Someone said, sounds like this is the coming age of the social worker, which is interesting. Is it about the team of rivals, aka Abraham Lincoln? Invest in the well-being of your staff and provide clarity and transparency and listen to the silence. Someone said, I use Feedly to create a reading list, to your point, Carolyn. And networking, everyone's commenting on that too, John, that the need for that in real life eventually when we get back to it. So I'd just like to take this moment to thank everybody for firstly attending, to the team who put the webinar together, and for our very special guests who are very busy people who've been very kind enough to spend their time to share their insights, and that it would be John Whittle, John Karagounis, Carolyn Chin-Parry, and Simon Wilkie. So it's goodbye from me, it's goodbye from them, and we look forward to connecting with you with some resources after this event. So take care, everybody. Thanks, everybody.